Hello and welcome back to How to Pass Music Technology. Today we're going to be looking at EQ, and we're going to be looking at EQ on the presenter. So let's get straight to it. We're going to go to our presenter track, and as you can see I'm already on EQ, but how I would get here is, if I just had it looking like this, I'm going to solo that track so I can hear it, and I'll go in and I'll just hit on these channel controls here, and then I can go to channel EQ. Here we have my EQ for the presenter. Now the first thing I'm going to do is have a listen, and I'm going to have a listen with the analyzer on as well. This is going to show me where a lot of the energy is on this EQ.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get going, here's a word from our sponsor.
It sounds nice. It's pretty well recorded, there's nothing kind of jutting out. There's maybe just one or two little things that I want to do. Now one thing that I'm going to do as just kind of good practice is to remove anything that might be down here. So I'm going to put on this high pass filter, and again it's just going to let those highs pass through, and anything that sort of awkward room sound or any sort of low rumbling that might be in this recording. There's not much, as you can see.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM.
I'm just going to use this to try and get rid of that in case it starts to build up over the time. Let's go in now and have a listen to it again.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get going,
now as you can see, it's a really lovely warm voice. Possibly too warm. Warm voices can be really comforting, but sometimes if we've maybe got a bed track or something else in there, it's not really shining out. It's kind of all hidden down here. And really, our ears are going to pick up on a lot of the lovely brightness up here. So it maybe needs just a little shade more of this and a little bit less down here. But this all comes down to kind of personal preference. So I'm going to use a relatively wide bell curve here, and I'm just going to take away from what we call the low mids. Low mids is this bit in here between 100 and 200. And I just don't like it building up too much in there. It can start to sound quite muddy. I'm just going to cut just a little shade there.
good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM.
Now I want you to add a bit of brightness up here. Don't want to be too dramatic with it. Let's use this filter here. And yeah, we'll keep that nice and wide, nice and generous curve. And we'll just put that somewhere between around kind of 2K.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get going, here's a word from our sponsor.
Now, there's just one other little thing that we need to address, and it's up here, round about kind of 4 to 6K. So we're going to have a little listen for some sibilance. Now, there's not too much, there is just a wee shade, and have a look at this 4K to 6K kind of section. I'm going to play it again with the analyzer on, and you can hopefully see a little bump in there.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get
You can hear that on a s sound. That's that sibilance. Have a look for it one more time.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get going,
And now what I can do is I'm going to apply this bell curve, and this time I'm going to exaggerate. I'm going to keep that Q, that bandwidth size, nice and narrow. I don't want it wide, and I'm really going to be quite aggressive. I'm going to aggressively boost this so you can hear it even more clearly.
good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get
You can really hear that kind of sibilance jumping out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm just going to cut that frequency. And that should help just a little bit with that sibilance up there.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get going, here's a word from our
And that helps just a little bit. And the last thing I would recommend doing is toggling your EQ on and off. It's just good practice to do. To keep going back to the original, back to your new EQ, and saying, is that making a difference? Is it making it better? Or am I making it worse? I need to go right back to square one.
Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland FM. Before we get going, here's a word from our sponsor.
Like I was saying, I'm just being really subtle with this, taking away from some areas, adding to a few, and looking for any little trouble spots where I can apply some corrective EQ.